Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, how do you keep learning and evolving your approach to organization development and change? So, learning isn't just about courses or reading. It happens through conversation, shared experiences, and being part of a peer community that both supports and challenges you. In this episode, we explore the power of professional networks and the critical role they play in our development. Now, we've invited the extremely engaging Mark Emdin, board member of ODN Europe, to discuss how professional networks shape our thinking, deepen our practice, and help us navigate the challenges of leading change. It's going to be a fascinating conversation because Mark is an accomplished international OD practitioner in his own right. So alongside talking about professional networks, we'll be delving into his career, his approach to OD, and what he's learned along the way. So Mark, along with being a leader of ODN Europe, is principal consultant of Nexi Coaching and Consultant. He's an OD and leadership team performance specialist. And in fact, Mark and I first met on the Advanced Practitioner Program for 6 Conditions of an Effective Team back in 2019. He's worked with senior teams across a diverse range of global companies and enjoyed a long and distinguished career at Shell, 19 years, I believe, in OD and org effectiveness roles, which is a fascinating environment. His international career started in Australia and is now based in Europe, and has worked with teams and in projects across Asia, Africa, and Central Europe. And he's leading the design of the ODN Europe conference for 2025, which has just been launched on sale now. And he's the proud owner of a very cute dog called Sasha. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for making time to us today. We're really glad to have you join us.
Danny, Garen, thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. And it's always quite, humbling or embarrassing when you hear someone kind of read out your bio. Did I really do all of that? So thank you for making me sound and look good.
It's lovely to have you with us. Before we get into the ODNE stuff, just tell us a bit about the work you do and your role and your approach to OD.
So as you said, Garen, I had a long career at Shell. It was a bit more than 19 years. Once I left, I decided to set up my own practice, focusing on organization development. It's primarily around OD more than the coaching. And I find that my work these days is really dominated by a few things. So the first is org design. There's a lot of change going on, transformation going on, which needs to be supported by quality org design work. And we can touch on that a bit later. Team effectiveness, and the two do go together. And there's a distinction between team building and creating team effectiveness. So the design and dynamics around creating and sustaining high-performing teams. And then the third focuses on what I would say is the human side of organizations. And I know you've had many speakers on that, and kind of trying to dial that up in my work as well. There's this systems approach. We talk about the technical aspect of our work, but there's a very strong need for dialogue and dynamics and that human interaction, and try to bring the two of those together in basically everything that I do.
And do you work with particular types of sectors or size of organizations?
No, across the board. Because I find that the work is industry agnostic. I actually sometimes find if I know too much about an industry or a company, it gets in the way of what I'm being brought in or asked to do. So I'm not there to be a subject matter expert. I'm not there to help them define their strategy. It is much more around good OD processes and practices that bring to life or help them have the conversations, the dialogue, go through the process that will activate and bring that to life. I enjoy working the spectrum between kind of large, stable organizations and then dynamic, chaotic startups. And we can touch on that as well, maybe a bit later, because they are very different and their needs are very different. And so one of the challenges is also, how do we as OD practitioners serve both? And are we equipped to serve both? One has lots of money, the other one doesn't. One needs to move very fast and at pace. The other one can afford to perhaps go a little bit more slowly. So there's a whole tension there also to be explored. So I tend to work across a range of industries, different size companies, and it's more about enjoying stepping into different systems that I find fascinating.
I'd echo that. It's the kind of variety you never quite know what you're going to get. And I think the other question I think is interesting is what's the commission? So when organisations bring you in, what's the starting point? Because that's always, I think, really interesting from an OD perspective. How do they describe what they want you to do or why they're bringing you in? Is there a kind of consistency across that?
Yeah, great question. I think if you ask that to different people, you'll probably get different answers, because I think the reason why they bring someone in or an organization in is based on the reputation that that individual or organization has. So for me, it has been very much around leaders or former colleagues who have now moved on into other organizations have approached me because they're experiencing challenges in that team dynamic space. That's kind of what I was known for. And I have a strong connection, as you mentioned, Garen, with 16 conditions. I know you had Krista on the show a while ago. I know Krista really well. I know Ruth very well. So that's kind of what I am and have been known for. And so I think, that kind of triggers off the commissioning. And then it's through the inquiry and spending time with individuals that you get a sense of, well, actually, that's a symptom of something else that's going on. So let's have a look at that. And I think there's also just a piece that goes with running your own business or running your own consultancy, that ongoing business development, continuing to have the conversations and reaching out and staying in touch and just finding out from your network what's going on, what's keeping them awake at night. And there might be something there where, we can offer either solution, help, or a referral to someone else who might be able to fix that problem. So that's kind of how I find that it's emerging.
So you mentioned teams. There has been so much research done on teams. There's so much we know about performance, but still teams, although the major units of getting the work done, they're still often a cause of so much friction and difficulty in organisations. And you talked about one thing there, which is like the difference between team building and team design. And often the commission will say, we need team building.
Yes.
Why is it that organisations just don't seem to be getting teams right? What are some of the sort of fundamental recurring problems that you see?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in that. Let's track back to when you ask people about teams and examples of how many high-performing teams have you really been on. I do this quite a lot at conferences and events when I speak, and most people will put their hand up and it'll be 5 digits or less. So very few of us have actually experienced what is it to be on a high-performing team. So our frame of reference is actually quite weak. Secondly, when you then have people give me examples of teams, they tend to be sporting teams and orchestras and the like. And then if you think about it, those teams spend more time actually practicing being teams than performing. They spend more time on the soccer pitch practicing playing the game. They spend more time in the rehearsal hall practicing the piece of music, more time in the pit changing the tires than they do actually performing. And yet in organizations, it's completely the other way around. We're so focused on performance and delivery that the notion of team and practicing and working on being a team comes second, third in order. And so not only do we have this where individuals are not really clear or don't have a good frame of reference of what good looks like, we're not creating the space and the conditions for that success to actually be defined and emerge. And there's a third element, which is around leadership. So we come from a history and tradition of training leaders to be emergent leaders, climb through the organization, be effective through networking, through charisma and so forth. But what isn't necessarily covered in leadership development programs is that notion of what is it to be an effective team leader, and shifting that notion of leadership or effective leadership to be my success as a leader is based on the performance of the team that I'm leading. And that's what I get rewarded for. And so there's a whole lot of things there at the very front end that get in the way of teams. And then you ask the question about what creates some of the friction in teams. A lot of it, Garen, is partly around lack of clarity and misunderstanding. Taking the time to really understand, and this is the work of the leader, this isn't the work of the team, those fundamental questions. Do I need a team? And if I do, why? Which is different from a group. All teams are groups, but not all groups are teams, as Krista often says. And so what is the work that requires the interdependency, which is that fundamental element that separates teams from groups? What is the compelling purpose that comes about through this team? Is it clear? Is it consequential? Am I clear on the skills and the people that I need on the team? And then when I've got my team together, have we had really good conversations around how we're going to work together and expectations with each other? And unless you've had those conversations, created those conditions that Ruth Wagaman talks a lot about, you do get that friction. Now, that's not to say that will kind of lubricate all the cogs, and then there'll be no friction in your team, but at least you've created those conditions. And then you can start having conversations around elements, more of the coaching conversations around. So how does personality play out? How does the use of language play out? And so forth. And so that's kind of that. Are we creating the foundation through our understanding of teams, our training of team leaders? Are we creating the conditions by which teams are designed? And then are we having the conversations that they need in order that they're effective?
There's so many different things you just mentioned there. One of the things that I was just really curious about, and because it is almost like counterintuitive, you talked about practice. So, for some teams, there is that action bias. And, sometimes people may think of it as indulgent, but what does practice look like for a team? Like, what is that? Is it inexpensive, take them away for 3 days and, do that kind of thing? Or what does it look like in particular?
The most effective practice is reflection. So the research does show that teams with a high degree of reflexivity or reflection outperform teams that are, as you say, very much focused on action or have that action bias. So that's one element. The second element is having established some really good work practices consciously, as opposed to unconsciously falling into ways of doing stuff, because that might not be the most effective way of doing it. And so the use of visual management, for example, or how often do you come together as a team? When you do come together, what are the things that you're going to engage and talk about so that people aren't frustrated and feeling, though, this is a waste of my time? And so those are all practices. That's all investing in you being a team. So those norms, those behaviors, those ways of working, as well as making sure that you've got the resources and the support from the organization to be effective as a team. And I think there's another element as well, which is, if you zoom out, how do the teams connect with each other? So working just with one team is, I would say, enjoyable, but it has limited impact on organization change, perhaps unless it's really the top team of an organization. But if you're wanting to make changes across an organization at scale, you need to be working on multiple teams or working with multiple teams, including how do those teams connect and support each other in that change that you're supporting.
Yeah, and again, I guess you have to be quite intentional about it because it doesn't happen by accident, does it? And often when you sort of see people, like the engagement data or people's satisfaction data, it's often that they feel quite close and loyal to their team colleagues. But as soon as they start reporting on their relationships outside of their team, then things start to deteriorate quite quickly. Does that fall under the responsibility of the manager then, does it? Or the org designer? Or like, where does that sit to help make those bridges get built?
Yeah, great question. I think we probably put too much emphasis on trying to build that bridge, because at the end of the day, that sense of belonging, that notion of belonging primarily, as you say, sits with the team that I'm a part of, whether it's the hybrid team or one that I directly report into, but it's kind of that team. That's where my belonging happens in organizations. And so that's where most of my, if you think about it, motivation will be driven by. It's not the leaders who are 3-4 levels up. That's where I would focus effort. At the same time, there needs to be an understanding of, so how does strategy and messages travel down the organization? How do you engage the bottom as well? So there's a very strong role there for, those middle managers who are sometimes undervalued and underrated in organizations to play. And that's one of the areas that I've started to get much more fascinated in or curious about, is the role of the middle manager, or particularly the strategic role of middle managers in affecting organizational change.
So you've had a really interesting career today. What was your journey into organization development and also sort of working with teams as well?
So I started my career in Australia on the graduate program of Shell and had a few roles, and one of them happened to be graduate recruitment. And that's where I kind of got my toe in when it comes to the HR function. And from there, it kind of either snowballed or spread out, took on different HR roles. I did try my hand in a marketing position and found I just couldn't get passionate about 0.5 cent a litre marketing margin fuel being trucked to the middle of nowhere. It really was about people. And then over the years, moved into what emerged as kind of organization training and development and change roles within Shell. And then finally, in my last few roles, we had established a very solid organization development practice. Shell had a heritage of OD in a way, a privilege to work in that organization. And so we had this solid OD practice, and there I was able to take on roles as OD manager for our corporate functions and also for our projects and technology organization, which is really where I got to play and experiment and develop an understanding for kind of systems and dynamics and so forth. And it was within Shell that the work of Ruth and Richard Hackman was brought in. But I must say, I've probably learned more about our craft, the three of us, org development, since I left Shell. And the reason being is that I've had the time and space to explore, experiment, connect in the areas that didn't need to fit a corporate agenda. So there's something about freedom and flexibility that comes with not being in a system, doing systemic work, but not being in the system. And so it's given me time to do a course at Ashridge, embark on some coaching training, have a pile of journal articles and red pen them all and go, oh yeah, but what happens if this, and I connect these together? And that's what I've loved about it. And as I say, I think it's really in the last few years I've really deepened my appreciation and understanding of OD more than when I was inside the organization, because it's decided for you to a certain extent what tools, what methods, what practices you'll use. I loved the opportunity to experiment when I was working inside Shell, had some great colleagues I worked with, learnt a lot, many I'm still connected with, and I was able to take that experience, that frontline experience, and now kind of measure it up against the theory, the research that I'm able to immerse myself in.
So we're going to shift gears slightly, because one of the things we wanted to talk to you about was the ODN organization. So just tell us a bit more about it for the audience who don't know what it is.
So the Organization Development Network Europe is the peak OD professional body for practitioners within Europe. It's a spin-off of OD Network in the US. And it does reflect the broad church that is OD. We have individuals who are very heavily invested in organization design, those who are very much into team performance and effectiveness, leadership development, agile, program management, and so forth. But the thing that it has at its heart is it's about bringing together individuals who have a curiosity and have an interest in the evidence-based, the research, new theories and practices, and at the same time, bring those to impact, bring those into organizations who have a curiosity of learning from each other, from that sense of community. And that's why, I find ODNE such a powerful organization. And I think the other thing is, again, the work we do can sometimes be quite lonely. Even if you sit inside an organization, because there's either not that many of us or very few people really understand what OD is. And so it's nice to have a place which is, independent, neutral, agnostic, that you can connect with individuals and be challenged and explore and maybe grab something and then go away and try it and bring back, well, how did that go? So I find it a wonderful organization to be a part of.
And you're a board member at ODNE. ODN.
I am. I joined the board last year.
I was going to say, what was the motivation behind that? What prompted you to kind of go to that level?
Yeah. So it was primarily, it was prompted by two things. One was to give back to the profession, and particularly to ODNE. I transitioned out of Shell into my own practice just before COVID, was able to go to one of the conferences before COVID. And then during COVID, everything went online, and ODNE really was a wonderful space for people to come together and support each other, I guess, in a way around how to deal with either everything going online and how do I do OD online. For some people, it was a bit more dramatic. They just saw their work completely disappear and were on hold for 2 years. So this was a really regenerative community to help them. And I really valued the diversity of people, thought, ideas, language, some of which I still don't understand because I'm wrapping my head around some of the language that can get in the way of OD. But so I wanted to give back. The second reason, there's an E at the end of ODNE. It has a heritage from the UK, but me sitting in Amsterdam, it didn't have a really big footprint. And so one of the things I wanted to do, and there's more of us now, was grow the European aspect of ODNE. And so I'm very active in getting people connected here in the Benelux region. We've recently had an event in Madrid in Spain. We're going to be having one in Bucharest coming up. I'm in contact with folks in the Nordics to try and grow the reach of ODNE. And the reason being is that, you talk about OD, it's a very Anglo language-based profession. When you talk to people in France or Germany or the Dutch countries, what is that? They're doing it, but it has a different label, but it's also being done in a slightly different way. So there's a national and cultural language issue there, as well as societal influences around how we do work, how we do things, that I find fascinating. And so that's one of the things that we're wanting to explore at ODNE as well, is it's OD, but it's done differently, it's labeled differently, and we can learn from each other when we start to kind of peel away some of those layers.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there any particular differences that people that have surprised you as you've done that work?
It's a great question. And there is something about Hofstede's work around hierarchy and the ability to challenge within cultures and organizations. And although all kind of cultures have that, in some people, it's felt to be easier than in others. Dutch hierarchy is very flat, and it's the ability to challenge and the need to have dialogue and build consensus is in the fabric of the Netherlands, very similar to Australia, where I grew up. But when you start looking at Germany, for example, and I don't want to play into stereotypes here, but it's when you've got some of those cross-cultural groupings, those differences can emerge. This is one of those areas we actually want to do some more research on and explore. And Jesse Sagers, who's on the board with me, that's an area that he's been looking into as well. And there's also a difference in terms of where people lean. So the idea of constellations is very well known in the Benelux area. Kind of some of the group dynamics work might be less so in the Nordics. So also the flavors can be different depending on which part of Europe you're in.
As you said earlier, kind of OD professionals, lots of different contexts. You've got internal roles, you've got external, you've got academia, consultants. What are some of the challenges bringing those diverse groups together? Because people have got quite strong perspectives and strong views. So how does that work when you're facilitating and kind of creating those spaces for dialogue for the profession? And
find the tension doesn't happen in the room of an event like the conference, because there's a reason why people have come together. There's a desire to connect and a curiosity that's there. I think the tension, Danny, sometimes exists outside of that room. And it can sometimes be in that relationship, for example, between the internal and the external OD consultant, who find that they need to be working together. And the dynamics and the power dynamics that might play there, there's politics involved. You're from inside the organization, you're a guest who's got power and all those sorts of things. Perhaps sometimes those that are more academically bent struggle to either convey the value in a very practical way that can be applied into an organization. I've sometimes seen those who are internal consultants, they've got the pressure of the organization on their shoulders. Now, they're the ones really holding the weight. We come in to help, but we don't hold the weight on our shoulders. And there's a pressure on them to be moving at speed. Garen, you said it earlier, that action bias. And so there's that tension between needing to slow things down sometimes and needing to go fast. And if you've got those who are trying to describe complex system dynamics, no, just give me the answer. Those tensions can get messy and so forth. And in a way, that's what makes ODNE quite exciting in a way, when you start to have those conversations in the small groups and in the breakouts. It's how do you make it happen? How do you bring it to life? How do you deal with the challenges and the barriers? And what is the value of evidence-based OD when we need to be delivering and turning around our business? I find those fascinating conversations.
I think the internal external thing's really fascinating. Is that sense of frustration sometimes from internal practitioners. That's when somebody external comes in, they've got more of a mandate or they're listened to in a different way. And the internal practitioners, well, I've been saying this or I've been talking about this for a long time. And there's been no interest, no traction. You bring in somebody outside who says the same thing and it lands differently and it gets taken more seriously.
You're spot on, and I experienced that and was a recipient of that when I was an internal consultant. So it's real. It happens.
And you've been given the task of actually designing the 2025 conference, which is a huge responsibility, but I imagine it's quite an exciting thing to do as well. What's been your process in terms of the theme that you wanted to focus on and the outcomes you wanted to achieve and putting together because we've looked at the list of speakers that you've got, and it's a really fascinating list of people that are both internal and external and bring a lot of different disciplines together.
So we started with a theme, and I was intentional on the theme to kind of shift some of the thinking around ODNE. So from insight to impact. Now, there's the risk when you're a professional body like ours that we focus on the insight piece. What's the new research, the latest book, the newest model and theory? But it is actually about the impact that we have in the workplaces that we go in and do our work. So from insight to impact, and you need both. And again, you'll see on the speaker list, we've got Shoshana coming to do a wonderful learning journey on polarities, and talking to her. And when I was listening to Tracy and Michelle, just that as a title is a polarity, insight and impact. And then from there, it was getting that mix of speakers who are external and internal and can talk about how has OD helped or got in the way of doing the work that's being asked of us in organizations. And I must say, it's been refreshingly, surprisingly easy to get speakers because people love talking about what we're working on or what they're researching, and have some really good individuals who also see this as a way of kind of giving back to the profession as well. So given that we're in Brussels, May 21st to 23rd, I want to make sure that we have, a good collection of speakers who represent the continent. We'll be in the UK every second year, at the moment. That is our heritage. But when we are on the continent, we want to make sure we're showcasing and bringing good speakers from the region.
For those who are interested, all of the details for the ODN conference are going to be in the show notes. But Mark, I'm sure you'll sort of say if people want to reach out to you and ask questions about the conference, then you're happy to sort of take messages from people.
Absolutely. You can connect with me via LinkedIn.
So just shifting gears, one of the things we love to ask people about are tools or methods that you enjoy using as well. One of the things that you just really stand out for you is the amount of curiosity you have and the amount you invest in your own personal development as well. You have an interest in improvisation. Now, in the 57 or 60 episodes, we've never talked to anyone who practices improvisation. What part does that play in your role, and how did you come about it? And what's the learning involved, and what's the impact that it has?
A lot.
Good.
Is the simplest way to put it. Danny, did I read that you were on the board of a Scout organization?
I am, yeah, board chair of a trustee board for a local Scout group.
Okay, answer to your question. So, Garen, for me, improvisation plays a huge role. And I'll come back to it why in a moment. You also asked the question about learning and development and training. The training I did in improvisation has probably been the single most effective training I've had when it comes to needing to engage with a group. Because at the end of the day, you can have a plan, but you don't know what's going to happen. And so you need to be kind of light on your feet and be able to hold that plan lightly. And that's basically what improv is. And way back when I was a kid, I was involved in scouting and was involved in gang shows. And I can't believe I'm sharing this on a podcast.
This is a sharing podcast.
It's a sharing podcast, huge in the UK, the gang shows and the world of Ralph Reeder. And so it was theatre. And that's where I got involved in both, first of all, theatre and then improvisation. And if you really think about it, there is an element of theatre to the work that we do. That's a bit undervalued. And focusing on improv, there's a great book by an improviser and an author, Robert Poynton. It's called Everything's an Offer. There's many great books on it. And what I like about it is when he talks about the improviser's mindset, it's three things. First of all, let go. Secondly, notice more. And thirdly, use everything. And so if you think about it, we need to let go when we step into the room or we're building an intervention of our own biases and preconceived ideas, even the plan that we have, because we're not sure what's going to happen when we bring this group of individuals together. So there's something about letting go. Notice more really plays to the wisdom is in the room. There are things, there are artifacts, there are dynamics, there are systems within systems playing out that, if noticed, can really help in the work that we're doing and help the group if you shine the light on them and actually make those visible to the group. And the last one is to use everything. Everything that a group generally needs to work through a challenge or an obstacle is there within them, if they're willing to harness and use those. And so having that as a mindset is actually really powerful. I wrote a blog post on this where I linked improvisation with psychological safety, and Amy Edmondson picked it up, and you can see the spike in my visits to my website. It's never been the same since. But there's something about it, because one of the other things about improv is your job is to make your teammates look good and feel fabulous. So you don't allow anybody to die on stage unless that's part of the scene. And so you step in, you support each other. The other thing is we fail. And when we fail fabulously, and we learn from those mistakes. And so that's, there's a whole raft of ways that I find improv to be incredibly powerful and useful in the work that we do. And when I work with groups and teams, I quite often share with them that improv mindset: let go, notice more, use everything, and have them think about those 6 words. If you were to apply those to the context that we're operating in today, or the challenge that has brought you together, how might that help you? And that really starts to unlock some of the self-imposed barriers that people bring in. And I'm also an adrenaline junkie. So, you're stepping on a stage and you got no idea what's going to happen. And it's wonderful. Again, it's the nature of the work that we do.
I think that could be a mantra for life, couldn't it? And I guess because it's interesting being a facilitator in a room, particularly because you're in the domain of change and transformation, and it's the emergent property of what's in that room on that day. So you can do one activity one day with one group and it's just a normal kind of activity, and other days things just happen. And I love what you're saying in terms of being light on your feet, because if you do try and plan the day and your timings are tight, but you have to have that freedom to move and work with what's in the group and work with your energy. Is that something that you actually quite enjoy and sort of notice, okay, I think we're going to go off plan here? And what might be some of the clues that things are starting to go off plan for you, do you feel?
I do enjoy going off plan, but you need to have a plan so that you're going off it. The other thing about improv is it's not chaos. So when you do see improv, the scene is always within a boundary. So if it's a game, there's rules to the game, but you just don't know what's going to happen within. So it's a bit like the container. We have the container, but we don't know what's going to happen in it. And so, to answer that question, it can be, I've had instances where an announcement has been made by senior leaders that have a direct impact on the work that the team's going to be doing that nobody was aware of, or emotions come to the surface and there's an eruption of some sort that needs to be acknowledged and dealt with and worked with. Now, they're just 2 examples of where what can happen. I think there was one quite more recently where we had asked a team to do some pre-work. Danny, you asked me at the beginning about the industry agnostic. So we don't know what's a good activity list for your profession or these roles. And as we started to work through these activity lists, it became very clear there wasn't a shared understanding of what the activities were within the team. And we really couldn't move on until we did that. So that meant what was going to take an hour basically took 3/4 of a day. But it was fundamental to be able to move forward. And so, it's like every night when you're doing this job, you're kind of redesigning for the next day. And again, that's what I love about this craft.
So, big question, but when you look back at your career so far, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Lessons that I've learned, I think, trust the process. We're often telling our clients to trust the process. We should trust our own processes as well. There's also something about, we've talked about flexibility, but being able to flex. And I had a bit of an aha moment when I read the work of Laura Hauser, and she talks about, as a facilitator or being in front of the room or working with a client, you're needing to shapeshift depending where their needs are. So I think one of those lessons is needing to hold lightly where you think you need to be compared to where the group needs you to be becomes important. I think it's also something about develop your own practice and style. It can be very easy to be at a conference, be at an event, listen to a podcast and go, I want to be like that person. But that person's already taken. And so who are you when it comes to doing this work? And what's the unique special quality that you bring to the work? Because we all do in different ways. And again, that's where doing this work in partnership with somebody else is very powerful, because you bring two different personalities, skill sets, outlooks to the client system. And that's something that I've learned to value more over time. And I think there's also something about knowing when to walk away. So there's walking away when the job is done. And there's also walking away because you're either not the right person for the work, or you're stepping into a space which is going to be a minefield and might be being brought in for the wrong reasons. Financially, it could be great. From a business point of view, it could be great. But from an ethical or professional point of view, it might not be. So just that knowing when to walk away is very powerful as well.
There's so many important lessons in there. If you're new to OD, just rewind that last 3 minutes back and play it forward again. So that's really powerful, isn't it? So you've got a lifelong career of learning, constantly throwing yourself into new ways of working and new contexts and whatnot as well. How do you invest in your own learning and development? Clearly, you've got a thirst for it, haven't you? But what methods do you use?
I read a lot. I have a pile of books that I haven't read yet, which is causing me anxiety, because I know there's good stuff in there and I need to find the time to read it. Podcasts. You mentioned my dog. It's a great way to listen to podcasts because I need to take her out for a walk a couple of times a day. Connecting with others. So whether that's through ODNE or other channels, the conversations that I have with other people I find really illuminating and quite challenging. Either just in conversation, they'll just drop something in. I had one recently where a colleague mentioned Morgan's metaphors for organizations. I'm not going to explain it. Look it up. The title is enticing, but think, oh, that's interesting, and go away and find out about it. So there's some of that, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just in the moment, learning ideas, sparks of curiosity, and then some formal things. So I did the program on executive team coaching at Ashridge. I did the foundations and the intermediate program of ORSC coaching, the relational systemic coaching. And I have on my to-do list, and now I'm about to make it public, I guess I have to do it, is the Leicester conference at TAVI. And I know you had a podcast on the Leicester conference, but there's something about that group dynamics and really immersing myself in it that I'm finding both exciting and scary at the same time.
Wow. Are you going the full 10 days, are you? Is it 10 or 14?
14.
Oh my good gosh.
14.
We can't wait to hear how that goes.
But I do remember from the podcast I listened to, name escapes me and I apologize for that, said, you either love it or you resist it. So we'll see which camp I fall in.
Yeah, so you've given us several book recommendations, which I've scribbled down because I'm an avid reader. I love a book. Are there any particular books or podcasts you recommend to kind of aspiring OD practitioners?
Yes, Sengi's 5th Discipline Field Handbook, I think, is a wonderful, even for experienced practitioners. It's always great to dip back into, and I've got a copy on my bookshelf that's well thumbed.
Me too.
I think the book on senior leader of teams by Ruth Wagaman and Richard Hackman's a great book. I listen to the Curious Advantage podcast, which is a really good one. Simon Brown and Gareth Jones, I think, and one other author. The book's really good as well. And I use Togan a lot in my work. And so the Science of Personality podcast I find interesting and entertaining. And the guys who do it are really good. And I find with podcasts, they kind of come and go as well. So, you listen to one and for a couple of episodes and there's only so many hours in the day. And so then another one comes along and another one comes along. And I have a good collection of journal articles that I kind of wade through.
Brilliant. And one of the reasons why we started the podcast was to inspire the next generation of people that are either about to embark on an organization development career or at just the early stage, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out?
Connect and network. I think that's one of the things I regret I didn't do enough of when I started this journey, certainly as an internal practitioner. And I think many of us do start as internal practitioners. So connect and network outside of your own organization is really important. Experiment. I do like the work of Amy Edmondson and her encouragement for experimentation, and you kind of learn from those failures. And I've had some spectacular ones in my time. But on reflection, they're really great learning moments. So take those calculated risks and experiment. I think there's also something about taking time out to reflect, and that's where supervision can be very powerful, even with a little s. It doesn't have to be big formal, but if you've got colleagues who are doing OD work, have lunch together and just simply talk about what's the work you're doing and how's it going and what are you struggling with. I think there's also something about, if you want to use tools and methods and frameworks, be selective on what you choose. And, I think the three of us support evidence-based methodologies and tools and frameworks, and get to know them really well. Immerse yourself in them, pull them apart, pull them back together, really understand what's behind them. So this is one of those cases where few is more. Don't become a tool collector. I don't think that helps.
It's really interesting because there's so many tools that are used by people. But if you actually dig a little bit deeper beneath the surface, they're more of a heuristic. There's not a massive evidence base behind them, but you have to do your research, don't you, to check them out?
You do. And I know you've had him on the show previously, David Wilkinson from the Oxford Review. I'm a fan of his work and I'm a member of the Oxford Review. It's a great place to get that grounded, evidence-based OD work. Same with ODNE, I should mention. And I said it already, I think there is something about tread your own path, much used line, but become the OD consultant that you want to become, not that you think is needed or that somebody else is, because then I think you become much more authentic, much more comfortable, and can really bring yourself to the craft and have more impact.
Well, I want to say a huge thank you, Mark. It's been a really engaging, insightful, precise, thought through podcast, and you've given us such brilliant insights. And so I think wherever you are in your career, there's just so many valuable things that you've shared today. So thank you. If people want to follow your work, if they want to learn more about the conference that's coming up, or they want to join the thriving community that is the ODNE network, what's the best way for them to reach out and follow up from this?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you'll put the link there. If you do want to connect with me, good to let me know that it's through the podcast, so you're not just some random stranger. So happy to connect that way, and or contact me through my ODNE email. Again, we'll put those in the show notes. But more importantly, it would be wonderful to see those who are in Europe at the conference. Find me, say hello. I'll be up the front somewhere, easy to find.
Brilliant. Thank you. There's so many takeaways. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
I've thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. So I think I loved what you said at the beginning about the fact that we don't spend enough time as teams practicing and working on being a team rather than just performing. I was really interested in the idea there's different flavours of OD across Europe, and kind of understanding more about that and kind of using that as something to be curious about. And the improv side of things, I want to explore more of that. I think there are lots of lessons in there that really, really apply to our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could have done a mic drop when you did the teams don't practice enough, because that is such a fundamental truth. And I think sometimes it's when something is then, when you hear it, it's so obvious that there's real genius behind that thought as well. Again, other things that stood out for me is like just being aware of the Anglo-American lens that we look through things in, and broaden your field and engage in the European network and beyond as well. And again, I loved what you said about the improvisation. So staying light on your feet and don't rigidly hold on to the plan, work with what's in the room, work with the energy, and apply that sort of wisdom that's in the room as well. And also just what you're saying about models, have some depth to it. Don't just throw models on because you find them quite interesting. Know the models, know the evidence base behind it, and apply it as well. So thank you so much, Mark. It's been a brilliant episode. We brought you on board to talk about ODNE, but we've got even more value from talking about your career as well. So thank you. It's been really, really good. Really enjoyed having you on. So thank you.
It's been my absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.